I never thought my tow truck business would land me in the middle of a legal nightmare involving an entitled HOA president, but here we are. My name is Quinton Drake, and I run a small towing company in suburban Phoenix, Arizona. What started as a simple case of someone trying to steal my services turned into one of the most bizarre situations I have ever dealt with in my 15 years in this business. It all began on a scorching Tuesday morning in late June, when I was working on some paperwork in my office. The temperature outside was already climbing past 100 degrees, and I was grateful for the air conditioning humming away. My phone rang, and I picked it up without thinking much of it. The woman on the other end had that particular tone that instantly put me on edge, the kind of voice that sounds like it has been permanently set to complain mode. "Yes, hello, this is Brenda Patterson, president of the Sunset Ridge Homeowners Association," she announced, as if I should be impressed. "I need your tow truck services immediately. There is an unauthorized vehicle parked in our community guest parking, and it needs to be removed right now." I leaned back in my chair, already getting a sense of where this was going. "Sure thing, madam. Our fee for a standard tow is $250, payable upon completion. What is the address?" There was a pause, then an incredulous laugh. "Excuse me, I am not paying for this. The Sunset Ridge HOA has an arrangement with local towing companies. You remove unauthorized vehicles from our property, and you collect your fees from the vehicle owners when they come to retrieve their cars from your lot." I had heard this pitch before from various HOAs, and it was always the same story. They wanted free towing services with the promise that I would make my money when the vehicle owner came to get their car back. The problem was that it did not always work out that way. Sometimes people abandoned their vehicles entirely, leaving me stuck with storage costs and no compensation. I had learned my lesson years ago. "I appreciate the call, Mrs. Patterson, but that is not how my business operates," I said firmly. "I require payment upfront from whoever is requesting the tow. If your HOA wants the vehicle removed, the HOA pays me. Then you can work out reimbursement with the vehicle owner however you see fit." "That is absolutely ridiculous," Brenda snapped. "Every other towing company in this area works with us on our terms. Who do you think you are?" "I am a business owner who has bills to pay and a family to feed," I replied, keeping my tone professional but firm. "If you would like to use my services, those are my terms. Otherwise, I can give you the numbers of some other companies you can try." She hung up without another word. I shrugged it off and went back to my paperwork, thinking that was the end of it. I had dealt with difficult customers before, and they usually either came around or found someone else to bother. Brenda Patterson, however, turned out to be a different breed entirely. 3 days later, I got a call from my dispatcher, Marcus, who sounded confused. "Hey boss, I just got a weird call from someone at Sunset Ridge HOA. They are saying you were supposed to tow a car from their property 2 hours ago and you are late. I do not have any record of a scheduled job." My jaw tightened. I turned down that job. The HOA president wanted free service, and I told her that was not happening. "Well, she seems to think you agreed to do it. She is pretty upset and threatening to report you to the Better Business Bureau for not showing up." I rubbed my temples, feeling a headache coming on. "Call her back and explain our policy again. Make it crystal clear that we never agreed to anything." Marcus did as I asked, but apparently Brenda was not satisfied. Over the next week, she called my office 6 more times, each time more aggressive than the last. She accused me of unprofessional conduct, claimed I was violating some imaginary contract, and even threatened legal action. I documented every call, every threat, and every demand. Something about her persistence bothered me, and I wanted a clear record of everything. Then things took a strange turn. On a Friday afternoon in mid-July, I was out on a call, towing a broken-down sedan from a parking garage downtown. My phone buzzed with a text from my wife, Nicole. She had sent me a photo of one of my tow trucks, the newer Ford F-550 with the rollback bed that I had purchased just 6 months earlier. The truck was parked in front of a house I did not recognize, hooked up to a silver Honda Accord. "Is this one of your jobs?" Nicole had written. "Saw this while driving through that fancy neighborhood near the mall. Thought you were downtown." My blood ran cold. I was downtown, and both of my other trucks were accounted for. One was at the shop getting maintenance, and the other was being driven by my employee, Derek, on a scheduled repo job across town. That meant someone had taken my truck without permission. I called Derek immediately. "Where are you right now?" "Just finishing up the repo on East Camelback," he replied. "Why? What is wrong? Is the F-550 at the yard?" "Should be. I drove the older Chevy today because you said the Ford was scheduled for a brake inspection this afternoon." I hung up and called my yard manager, Pete, who confirmed that the F-550 had been sitting in the locked yard all morning. Except it clearly was not there anymore, because it was currently in Sunset Ridge, hooked up to someone's car. I told Pete to check the security cameras immediately and then turned my current job over to a buddy who owed me a favor. Within 15 minutes, I was speeding towards Sunset Ridge, my mind racing through possibilities. Someone had stolen my truck. That much was clear. But who? And how did they get past the locked gate and ignition security? When I arrived at the neighborhood, I drove slowly through the streets, scanning for my truck. Sunset Ridge was one of those cookie-cutter planned communities that had sprung up all over Phoenix in the past decade. Every house looked nearly identical, with beige stucco walls, terracotta roof tiles, and desert landscaping that probably violated 3 different water conservation laws. I spotted my truck parked on a cul-de-sac, still hooked up to the Honda. But here is where things got really interesting. Sitting in the driver's seat of my truck, fumbling with the controls, was none other than Brenda Patterson herself. I recognized her from the profile picture on the Sunset Ridge HOA Facebook page, which I had looked up after her first hostile phone call. She was a woman in her early 50s with short blonde hair styled in that particular way that screamed, "I want to speak to the manager." She wore a white linen blazer despite the heat and oversized sunglasses that probably cost more than my monthly insurance payment. I parked my personal vehicle behind the truck, blocking it in, and got out. Brenda saw me coming and actually had the audacity to wave, like we were old friends meeting for coffee. "Finally," she called out. "I was beginning to think this truck drives itself." "The controls are much more complicated than I expected. You really should put instruction labels on everything." I stood there for a moment, genuinely speechless. "Mrs. Patterson, what are you doing with my truck?" She looked at me like I was the one being unreasonable. "What does it look like?" "I am towing this vehicle, since you refused to do the job I hired you for. I went to your yard this morning and explained the situation to the young man at the gate. He was very understanding and gave me the keys." That was a lie, and we both knew it. Pete would never hand over keys to anyone, and our yard was secured with cameras and electronic locks, but I wanted to hear more of her story before I laid into her. "You just took my truck without permission," I said slowly, making sure every word was clear. "That is theft, Mrs. Patterson. Grand theft auto, to be specific." She waved her hand dismissively. "Do not be so dramatic. I left a note explaining where I was taking it. Besides, you are going to get paid for this job, so I do not see what the problem is. The HOA will write you a check as soon as you finish towing this car." Let me make sure I understand this correctly, I said, pulling out my phone and starting a voice recording. You took my commercial vehicle without my permission, without a valid contract for services, and without payment. And you think that is legal? It is community property, Brenda insisted, though her confidence was starting to waver. Well, not property exactly, but you are a service provider in this area, and we have the right to access services we need. It says so right in our HOA bylaws. I had to bite my tongue to keep from laughing at the absurdity. Your HOA bylaws do not give you the right to steal private property. Please step out of the truck right now. I will not. I have not finished the job yet. This car belongs to a tenant who has been violating our parking regulations for 3 weeks. The owner refuses to respond to our notices, and we have the legal right to have it towed. Then you should have hired a towing company that agreed to your terms, I said. Get out of my truck now, or I am calling the police. Brenda's expression shifted from entitled indignation to something more calculating. If you call the police, I will file a complaint against your company for harassment and refusing to provide services. I will make sure every HOA in Phoenix knows not to use your business. Do you have any idea how much influence I have in this community? I had already pulled up the non-emergency police number. I am willing to find out. Her eyes widened as I pressed the call button. She scrambled out of the truck, nearly tripping over her own feet in her hurry. This is not over. You are making a huge mistake. The Phoenix Police Department non-emergency dispatcher was professional and calm as I explained the situation. They said they would send an officer out to take a report. While we waited, Brenda tried several times to leave, but I made it clear that she needed to stay and explain to the police how she had gotten access to my vehicle. She called someone on her phone, speaking in hushed, angry tones. I caught fragments of her conversation. This is absurd, and he is being completely unreasonable, and I need you to come down here right now. Officer Martinez arrived about 20 minutes later, looking tired in the afternoon heat. He was a middle-aged Hispanic man with graying hair and the patient demeanor of someone who had seen everything. I explained the situation from the beginning, showing him the text messages from Brenda, the photos Nicole had sent, and the call logs documenting her harassment over the past 2 weeks. Brenda tried to interrupt several times, but Officer Martinez held up his hand. "Madam, let him finish, please." When I was done, the officer turned to Brenda. "Is it true that you took this vehicle without Mr. Drake's permission?" "I left a note," she insisted. And I explained everything to the employee at his yard. This is all a misunderstanding. Did Mr. Drake or anyone authorized by his company give you permission to take this truck? Brenda hesitated. Not in so many words, but there was an implied agreement based on our previous conversations. Officer Martinez looked at me. Did you give her permission? Absolutely not. I told her multiple times that I would not provide services under her terms. I never agreed to anything. The officer nodded and turned back to Brenda. "Madam, I need to see some identification." While Brenda dug through her designer purse, I checked on my truck. The keys were in the ignition, which meant she had somehow gotten a copy made or picked the lock. When I reviewed the dashboard camera footage later, I would discover exactly how she had pulled this off. But in that moment, I was just relieved the truck was not damaged. Officer Martinez ran Brenda's information and then spent several minutes writing in his notepad. Finally, he looked up. "Mrs. Patterson, Mr. Drake is alleging that you took his vehicle without permission. That constitutes unauthorized use of a vehicle under Arizona Revised Statute 13-1803. Given the value of this commercial truck, which I am estimating to be over $20,000, this could be charged as a Class 4 felony. Brenda's face went pale. A felony? This is absolutely insane. I was trying to perform my duties as HOA president. This is a civic service. Your HOA position does not give you the right to take someone else's property, Officer Martinez said firmly. I am going to write up a report and forward it to the Detective Bureau. They will determine if charges should be filed. In the meantime, you need to return anything you used to gain access to this vehicle. Keys, tools, anything. I do not have anything, Brenda lied, but her eyes flickered to her purse. Madam, if you are found in possession of keys or devices used to steal this vehicle, that is additional evidence of intent. I strongly suggest you cooperate. Reluctantly, Brenda pulled out a key fob from her purse. It was clearly a copy, poorly made at one of those kiosks you find at hardware stores. Officer Martinez took it as evidence, placing it in a clear bag. After getting statements from both of us, Officer Martinez handed me a case number and said a detective would be in touch. He gave Brenda a stern warning about staying away from my property and my business, then left to respond to another call. As soon as the officer was gone, Brenda rounded on me. You just made the worst enemy of your life. I have connections. I know people on the city council, the mayor's office, and I chair 3 different community boards. Your business will be destroyed by the time I am done with you. I had been patient up to this point, but her threats were starting to wear thin. Mrs. Patterson, I strongly suggest you get a lawyer and stop talking to me. Everything you say is being recorded, and you are just digging yourself deeper. She opened her mouth to respond, then seemed to think better of it. Instead, she stalked off to her white Mercedes SUV, which was parked a few houses down. She peeled out of the neighborhood like a teenager late for curfew, leaving black marks on the pristine suburban street. I disconnected the Honda from my truck and drove the F550 back to my yard. Pete was apologetic and confused when I arrived. He showed me the security footage from that morning. Brenda had not talked her way past him at all. Instead, she had apparently been stalking my business for days, watching our routines. She had waited until Pete was helping another customer at the front office, then had climbed the fence at the back of the yard. The cameras caught her trying several vehicles before finding one unlocked, the F550, which Derek had forgotten to lock after parking it the night before. She had spent nearly 15 minutes searching the truck before finding the spare key fob that I kept hidden in the center console for emergencies. I made a mental note to never leave spare keys in vehicles again, no matter how well hidden. Over the next few days, I tried to get back to normal business, but the situation with Brenda kept escalating. She filed a complaint with the Better Business Bureau, claiming I had refused service and verbally harassed her. I submitted my evidence, and the BBB dismissed her complaint within 48 hours. She left 1-star reviews on every platform she could find, from Google to Yelp to Facebook. Each review was full of lies and exaggerations, but at least I could respond with the truth and my documentation. Then she went after my business license. She filed a complaint with the Arizona Department of Transportation, which regulates towing companies in the state, claiming I was operating illegally and refusing to comply with local ordinances. That one actually worried me, because government investigations can drag on forever and cost thousands in legal fees to defend against, even when you have done nothing wrong. I hired a lawyer, a sharp woman named Patricia Morales who specialized in business defense. She looked over all my documentation and actually laughed when she read Brenda's complaint. "This is one of the most frivolous things I have seen in years," Patricia said. "The ADOT is going to toss this out immediately, but we should prepare for the possibility that the criminal case moves forward." "Do you think it will?" I asked. "Honestly." "Yes. She committed felony theft and you have overwhelming evidence. The question is whether the prosecutor thinks it is worth their time." These cases can be tricky because people often claim misunderstandings or civil disputes rather than criminal intent. "She climbed a fence, searched through my truck, found hidden keys, and drove off with a vehicle worth over $60,000, I said. "How is that not criminal intent?" "I agree with you completely, but prosecutors have limited resources and they have to prioritize. We need to make sure they understand this was not a simple misunderstanding. This was theft, and she continued to harass you even after being confronted." Patricia helped me compile everything into a comprehensive package. The call logs, text messages, voice recordings, security footage, witness statements from Pete and Derek, and Officer Martinez's initial report. We sent it all to the Detective Bureau with a cover letter explaining the timeline and the escalating harassment. Detective Sarah Gonzalez contacted me about 2 weeks after the incident. She was a sharp, no-nonsense investigator with the Phoenix PD's Property Crimes Unit. We met at a coffee shop in Scottsdale and I walked her through everything again. She took notes, asked pointed questions, and seemed genuinely interested in the case. "This is pretty cut and dry," she said after I finished. "The surveillance footage alone is damning. The question is whether she will cooperate or fight this." "Based on my interactions with her, I am guessing she will fight," I said. Detective Gonzalez nodded. "That is what I figured. I will reach out to her and get her statement. If her story contradicts the evidence, which I suspect it will, I will present the case to the prosecutor for filing." I thanked her and left feeling cautiously optimistic. Patricia had warned me that criminal cases move slowly, and she was right. Weeks passed with no word. I focused on my business, which was actually doing better than ever. Apparently, Brenda's negative reviews had backfired. People saw her obvious lies and my documented responses, and several new clients reached out specifically because they respected how I had handled the situation. In early September, Detective Gonzalez called with an update. "I interviewed Mrs. Patterson yesterday. Her story has changed significantly from what she told Officer Martinez. She is now claiming that she had verbal permission from you to use the truck and that you are fabricating evidence because of a personal vendetta." "That is completely false," I said, though I was not surprised. "I know. I played her the recordings of your phone conversations and showed her the surveillance footage. She became very defensive and eventually stopped answering questions without her lawyer present. I submitted the case to the prosecutor's office this morning with a recommendation for felony theft charges." My heart raced. This was really happening. What happens next? The prosecutor will review the evidence and decide whether to file charges. Given the strength of the case, I would be surprised if they passed on it. But you never know. I will keep you updated. Another month went by. It was late October when Patricia called me with news. The Maricopa County Attorney's Office has filed charges against Brenda Patterson. 1 count of felony theft under Arizona Revised Statute 13-1802. She is being arraigned next week. I felt a strange mix of relief and anxiety. I had never been involved in a criminal case before, and the whole process felt surreal. Patricia explained what would happen next. Brenda would appear before a judge, enter a plea, and the case would either go to trial or be resolved through a plea agreement. "Most cases like this end in plea deals," Patricia explained. "Prosecutors do not want to waste time and resources on a trial when the evidence is this strong. And defense attorneys usually advise their clients to take a deal rather than risk a worse outcome at trial." The arraignment was scheduled for a Tuesday morning at the Maricopa County Superior Court in downtown Phoenix. Patricia said I did not need to attend, but I wanted to be there. I needed to see this through. Nicole came with me for support, and we sat in the gallery of a bland courtroom that smelled like old wood and recycled air. Brenda arrived with her attorney, a polished man in an expensive suit who looked like he specialized in white-collar crime. Brenda herself looked different from the last time I had seen her. The entitled confidence was gone, replaced by a tight expression of barely contained panic. She saw me in the gallery and actually flinched, then quickly looked away. The arraignment was brief and procedural. The judge read the charges, and Brenda entered a plea of not guilty. Her attorney immediately requested a continuance to review the evidence, which the judge granted. The whole thing took less than 10 minutes. As we filed out of the courtroom, Brenda's attorney approached me. "Mr. Drake, I am Jonathan Reeves, representing Mrs. Patterson. I was hoping we could discuss this matter privately." Patricia stepped between us smoothly. "Mr. Drake is represented by counsel. Any communication should go through me." Reeves nodded, handing her a business card. "Of course. I think we can resolve this without a trial. My client made a serious error in judgment, and she is willing to make restitution. We will consider any reasonable offers," Patricia said diplomatically. Over the next few weeks, there were negotiations between the defense, the prosecution, and my attorney. Brenda's lawyer initially tried to argue for a misdemeanor charge with probation and minimal restitution. Patricia and the prosecutor shut that down immediately. The evidence was too strong, and Brenda's continued harassment even after the theft showed a pattern of behavior that could not be dismissed as a simple mistake. The breakthrough came in mid-November. Brenda's attorney reached out with a serious offer. Brenda would plead guilty to felony theft, accept 2 years of supervised probation, perform 200 hours of community service, and pay full restitution to me for all costs associated with the theft and the subsequent legal battle. The restitution number was significant. Patricia and I had documented everything. The cost of changing locks and security systems at my yard, the lost business hours dealing with the incident and investigation, attorney fees, and the fair market rental value of the truck for the hours Brenda had it in her possession. We also included the cost of the mental anguish and harassment I had endured. The total came to just over $37,000. Brenda's attorney balked at the number initially, but Patricia stood firm. "Your client committed felony theft of a commercial vehicle and then engaged in a campaign of harassment against the victim. She filed false complaints, left defamatory reviews, and attempted to destroy his business. The restitution demand is entirely reasonable given the circumstances." The prosecutor backed Patricia up, noting that if the case went to trial and Brenda was convicted, the judge could impose even harsher penalties. Facing that reality, Brenda agreed to the terms. The plea hearing was scheduled for early December. This time, the courtroom was more crowded. Several members of the Sunset Ridge HOA board were present, looking uncomfortable and whispering among themselves. I later learned that Brenda had been quietly removed from her position as president after the charges were filed, and the HOA was conducting an internal review of her actions. Judge Patricia Hamilton presided over the hearing. She was a stern woman in her 60s with silver hair and reading glasses perched on her nose. She reviewed the plea agreement carefully, asking Brenda several questions to ensure she understood what she was agreeing to. "Mrs. Patterson, do you understand that by pleading guilty to felony theft, you will have a permanent criminal record?" the judge asked. "Yes, Your Honor," Brenda said quietly. Her voice was nothing like the aggressive, entitled tone I had heard on the phone months earlier. "And do you understand that you are agreeing to pay $37,000 in restitution to Mr. Drake?" "Yes, Your Honor." "And you understand that if you violate any terms of your probation, you could be sentenced to prison?" "Yes, Your Honor." Judge Hamilton nodded and accepted the plea. She then launched into a speech that I will never forget. "Mrs. Patterson, this case represents a profound failure of judgment on your part. As the president of a homeowners association, you held a position of trust within your community. Instead of exercising that trust responsibly, you allowed your personal frustrations to escalate into criminal behavior. You did not simply make a mistake. You planned and executed the theft of an expensive piece of commercial equipment. You climbed a fence, searched through a vehicle that did not belong to you, and drove away with property you had no right to take. Then, when confronted with your actions, you lied to law enforcement and attempted to intimidate the victim. This behavior is completely unacceptable." Brenda kept her eyes down, her face flushed with shame. The judge continued, "I am accepting this plea agreement because I believe you can be rehabilitated, and because Mr. Drake will be made whole through restitution. But make no mistake, if you violate any terms of your probation, I will not hesitate to impose the maximum prison sentence. Do you understand?" "Yes, Your Honor. I am truly sorry for what I did." "Your apology would be more meaningful if directed at Mr. Drake rather than at this court." Brenda turned to look at me for the first time. Her eyes were red, and she looked like she had aged 10 years since I had last seen her. "Mr. Drake, I am deeply sorry for what I did to you and your business. There is no excuse for my behavior. I hope someday you can forgive me." I did not respond. I simply nodded once, acknowledging her words without accepting or rejecting them. The truth was, I did not know how I felt. Part of me was satisfied to see justice being done. Part of me just felt tired of the whole ordeal. After the hearing, Patricia and I met with the prosecutor to finalize the restitution payment plan. Brenda would pay $5,000 immediately, then $1,000 per month until the full amount was paid off. If she missed a payment, she would be in violation of her probation and subject to arrest. "She will pay," the prosecutor assured me. "Her husband has money, and they do not want this dragging out any longer than necessary. You should see the first check within a week." Sure enough, 5 days later, a cashier's check for $5,000 arrived at my office via certified mail. It was signed by Brenda's husband, Richard, and included a brief note apologizing for his wife's actions. I deposited the check and updated my records. Over the following months, the payments arrived like clockwork. Brenda was clearly terrified of violating her probation, which meant she was taking the restitution seriously. I used the money to upgrade my security systems, hire an additional employee, and finally take Nicole on the vacation we had been planning for years. We spent a week in San Diego, enjoying the beach and trying to forget about tow trucks and entitled HOA presidents. The community service requirement ended up being somewhat poetic. As part of her sentence, Brenda was required to complete 200 hours of service with a non-profit organization. The judge specifically assigned her to work with a legal aid clinic that helped low-income residents fight unfair HOA regulations and fees. She spent 6 months helping the very people that HOAs like hers often targeted, and I heard through the grapevine that the experience was humbling for her. The Sunset Ridge HOA, meanwhile, underwent significant reforms. After Brenda's conviction became public, several residents came forward with complaints about her management style. Apparently, the incident with my tow truck was just the tip of the iceberg. She had been making unilateral decisions without board approval, spending HOA funds on personal expenses, and threatening residents who questioned her authority. The board conducted a full audit and discovered that Brenda had misappropriated nearly $15,000 in HOA funds over 2 years for things like personal dinners, spa visits, and clothing she claimed were for HOA functions. The HOA chose not to press additional charges in exchange for Brenda repaying the misappropriated funds, but they did implement new oversight procedures and elected an entirely new board. The new president, a retired accountant named Michael Chen, reached out to me personally to apologize for what had happened and to assure me that the HOA would never make demands for free services again. What Brenda did was inexcusable, Michael said when we met for coffee. She had no authority to take your truck, and she certainly had no right to harass you the way she did. On behalf of the Sunset Ridge community, I want to make sure you know that her behavior does not represent our values. I appreciated the gesture, though I told him that no apology was necessary. Brenda made her own choices. The HOA as an entity was not responsible for her criminal actions. Still, we want to make this right. If you are ever willing to work with us in the future, we promise to respect your business policies and pay fairly for your services. I considered it for a moment, then nodded. Send me a contract with your terms and I will review it. If it is reasonable, we can talk about doing business. Michael kept his word. Within a week, I received a proposed contract that was actually more favorable than what I typically offered. The HOA would pay upfront for any towing services, with a small retainer fee to guarantee priority response times. It was a good deal, and I signed it. To date, I have towed about a dozen vehicles from Sunset Ridge, and every interaction has been professional and drama-free. By the spring of the following year, Brenda had completed her community service hours and was making steady progress on her restitution payments. I had not seen her since the plea hearing, and I was fine with that. My business was thriving, my family was happy, and the whole ordeal had become just another story to tell at industry conferences. Then, in late April, I received an unexpected letter in the mail. It was from Brenda, handwritten on nice stationery. I almost threw it away without reading it, but curiosity got the better of me. "Dear Mr. Drake," it began. "I know I have already apologized in court, but I wanted to reach out to you personally now that some time has passed. What I did to you was wrong on every level. I allowed my pride and my sense of entitlement to override my judgment and my morals. I convinced myself that I was in the right, that I was serving my community, when in reality, I was just serving my own ego. The past several months have been the most difficult of my life, but also the most educational. I have lost my position in the HOA, my reputation in the community, and the respect of many people I once called friends. I deserved all of it. What I did not deserve was the patience and professionalism you showed throughout this ordeal. You could have made things much worse for me, but you simply stood up for yourself and let the justice system work as it should. I am grateful for that. I am also grateful for the opportunity to work at the Legal Aid Clinic as part of my community service. I have met so many people who have been hurt by HOAs that abuse their power, and I have come to realize that I was part of the problem. I am committed to doing better, to being better. I do not expect your forgiveness, and I am not asking for it. I just wanted you to know that your actions changed my life, hopefully for the better. I will finish paying my restitution by the end of this year, and then I hope to move forward and rebuild my life with more humility and integrity. Thank you for teaching me a lesson I desperately needed to learn. Sincerely, Brenda Patterson. I read the letter twice, then showed it to Nicole. She was more forgiving than I was. It sounds like she has actually learned something, Nicole said. That is more than you can say for most people in her situation. Maybe, I said. Or maybe she is just good at saying the right things now that she has been caught and punished. Does it matter? She is paying you back. She has done her community service, and she has been held accountable. What more do you want? I thought about that for a while. What did I want? Justice. I had gotten that. An apology. I had that too multiple times. Revenge. That had never been my goal. I just wanted to run my business in peace and be treated with respect. I do not want anything, I finally said. I just want this to be over. Then let it be over, Nicole said gently. You won. She was right, of course. I had won. Brenda had been convicted, she was paying restitution, and my business was better than ever. Holding on to anger or resentment would only hurt me at this point. So I folded up the letter, put it in a file with all the other documents from the case, and decided to move on. The final restitution payment arrived in early November, almost exactly a year after the plea agreement. It was accompanied by another brief note from Brenda, thanking me for my patience and wishing me well. I deposited the check, updated my records one last time, and closed the file on Brenda Patterson. A few weeks later, I was having lunch with Patricia Morales to celebrate the conclusion of the case. We met at a Mexican restaurant in Tempe, and she ordered the biggest margarita on the menu. We should do this more often, she joked. Cases where the good guy actually wins and gets paid in full. How often does that happen? I asked. Not as often as it should, she admitted. Most of the time, victims have to settle for partial restitution or nothing at all. You were lucky that Brenda had the means to pay and was scared enough of prison to take the plea seriously. It did not feel like luck at the time. I am sure it did not, but think about it. You had clear evidence, a cooperative police department, a prosecutor willing to file charges, and a defendant who ultimately took responsibility. A lot of things could have gone wrong, but they did not. That is luck, combined with your diligence in documenting everything. I raised my glass to that. Here is to documentation and security cameras. Patricia laughed and clinked her glass against mine. And to standing up for yourself, even when dealing with entitled people who think the rules do not apply to them. As we ate and talked, I reflected on everything that had happened over the past 18 months. It had been stressful, frustrating, and at times infuriating. But it had also taught me important lessons about boundaries, documentation, and the value of having good legal representation. Most importantly, it had taught me that sometimes doing the right thing means being willing to fight, even when it would be easier to just let things go. I thought about all the times I could have backed down. When Brenda first called demanding free services, I could have just done the job to avoid conflict. When she took my truck, I could have brushed it off as a misunderstanding and let it go. When she harassed me with complaints and negative reviews, I could have decided the legal battle was not worth the trouble. But I did not do any of those things. I stood my ground, documented everything, and trusted the system to work. And in the end, it did. That does not mean the system is perfect. I know plenty of people who have been victims of theft or harassment and never saw justice. I was fortunate to have strong evidence, the resources to hire a good attorney, and a prosecutor who took the case seriously. Not everyone has those advantages. But I also think my persistence mattered. If I had given up or let Brenda intimidate me into dropping the charges, she would have gotten away with it and probably would have done the same thing to someone else. A few months after the case concluded, I was contacted by a local news reporter who had heard about the story. She wanted to do a piece on HOA overreach and thought my experience would be a good example. I agreed to an interview, figuring it might help other small business owners who find themselves in similar situations. The segment aired on a Friday evening in February. It was a well-balanced piece that told my story without turning it into a sensational drama. The reporter interviewed me, showed clips of my security footage, and included a statement from the new Sunset Ridge HOA president about the reforms they had implemented. She also interviewed a legal expert about the limits of HOA authority and the importance of documentation in theft cases. The response was overwhelming. I received dozens of emails and phone calls from people sharing their own stories of HOA abuse and entitled behavior. Some were worse than mine. Stories of HOAs foreclosing on homes over minor violations, imposing thousands of dollars in fines for trivial infractions, and using their positions to settle personal vendettas. Others were similar to my experience, people trying to get free services or goods by claiming some imaginary authority. Several people asked for advice on how to handle their situations. I always told them the same thing. Document everything, know your rights, and do not be afraid to involve law enforcement when someone crosses the line from annoying to criminal. I also gave them Patricia's contact information, knowing she would be happy to help people who were being victimized by abusive HOAs. The news segment also attracted attention from other HOAs, the good ones run by reasonable people who were embarrassed by what Brenda had done. Several reached out to establish professional relationships, and my business actually picked up significantly in the months that followed. It turned out that being known as the guy who stood up to an entitled HOA president was good for business. Now, 2 years after the initial incident, life has settled into a comfortable routine. My company has grown by about 30%, and I have hired 2 more drivers to keep up with demand. Nicole and I bought a bigger house in Chandler with a pool for our kids. And I have not had to deal with a single case of vehicle theft since Brenda Patterson, which I consider a minor miracle. I still see Brenda around occasionally. Phoenix is a big city, but certain circles overlap. I saw her at a grocery store once, and we made brief eye contact before she quickly turned and walked away. I saw her again at a community event at our kids' school. It turned out her daughter was in the same grade as my son. She nodded politely from across the room but made no attempt to approach me. I appreciated that. The last update I heard about her was that she had started volunteering regularly at the legal aid clinic, even after her community service hours were complete. Apparently, she had developed a passion for helping people fight unfair HOA practices, which struck me as deeply ironic, but also hopeful. Maybe people really can change. Maybe being held accountable for your actions is the first step toward becoming a better person. Or maybe she just found a new way to feed her ego by positioning herself as a reformed villain helping others. I do not know, and frankly, I do not care. She is not my problem anymore. She paid her debt, served her time, and now we just exist in the same city without interacting. That is good enough for me. Looking back, I am grateful for how things turned out. Not grateful that it happened, obviously, but grateful that I had the resources and determination to see it through. I am grateful for Patricia's legal expertise, for Detective Gonzalez's thorough investigation, for the prosecutor who was willing to file charges, and for Judge Hamilton who made sure Brenda understood the severity of her actions. Most of all, I am grateful that I trusted my instincts from the beginning. When Brenda first called demanding free services, I could have second-guessed myself. I could have worried that I was being too rigid or that I would lose business by refusing. But I knew my worth, I knew my policies, and I stuck to them. That confidence carried me through everything that followed. I have shared my story with other small business owners, and the response has always been the same. A mixture of shock at what Brenda did and admiration for how I handled it. But I do not think I did anything special. I just refused to be a victim. I documented everything, stood my ground, and trusted the legal system to work. Those are things anyone can do if they find themselves in a similar situation. The one piece of advice I always give is this: do not let entitled people intimidate you into giving up your rights or your business policies. There are a lot of Brendas out there, people who think their position or their attitude gives them the right to take what they want without paying or following the rules. If you cave to their demands once, they will keep coming back. But if you stand firm, document everything, and are willing to fight when necessary, you will win more often than you lose. I also tell people to invest in good security systems. Those cameras at my yard were worth every penny. Without that footage of Brenda climbing the fence and searching my truck, the case would have been much harder to prove. She could have claimed it was all a misunderstanding, and it might have come down to her word against mine. But the video evidence was undeniable. It showed exactly what she did, when she did it, and how she did it. That made all the difference. Finally, I tell people to get a good lawyer early. I hired Patricia as soon as I realized this was going to be more than just a simple misunderstanding, and that decision saved me countless headaches. She knew what evidence to gather, how to present it to law enforcement, and how to negotiate a favorable restitution agreement. Trying to handle something like this on your own is possible, but it is much harder and much riskier. As I sit here now, 2 years removed from the chaos, I feel a sense of peace. My business is thriving, my family is happy, and I have a great story that I will be telling for years to come. The story of the time an entitled HOA president tried to steal my tow truck and ended up with a felony conviction and $37,000 in restitution. It is a story about standing up for yourself, about the importance of documentation and legal representation, and about the fact that sometimes the system really does work. It is also a story about consequences. Brenda thought she could do whatever she wanted because of her position and her attitude. She thought she was above the rules, but she learned the hard way that nobody is above the law. I hope other people in similar situations can take inspiration from my experience. If someone is trying to intimidate you, harass you, or take advantage of you, do not just accept it. Fight back. Document everything. Get help when you need it. And trust that if you do the right things, justice will usually prevail, not always, but usually. And that is the best any of us can hope for.